All right, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are tackling something that literally every homeowner needs to know about. But let's be honest, almost nobody actually thinks about it until it's far, far too late. We're taking a really fascinating spatial journey, essentially a gravity journey, to protect our homes from seasonal water damage. We're going to be walking through a top-down drainage checklist inspired by the experts at Dr. Drain, and specifically designed for homeowners who are facing that brutal winter to spring transition. So get ready, because we're going to follow a single drop of water from the absolute top of your house all the way down into the ground, just to make sure your home stays bone dry.
There's this saying from the source that perfectly captures the threat we're up against. Snow piles up, temperatures swing, and spring runoff arrives fast. That really paints a picture, doesn't it? If you live in an area like Illinois where the weather just has a mind of its own, you know exactly what this means. It is the terrifying reality of a rapid spring melt. The snow doesn't just peacefully evaporate up into the clouds. It melts fast, it surges, and if your drainage systems aren't ready to handle that massive, sudden volume of water, you're in for a world of trouble. Getting prepared right now before the big thaw is absolutely urgent.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our top-down roadmap for today. We'll start with the spring melt threat, move up to defending the roofline, then head down for ground and yard drainage before protecting your foundation, and we'll wrap it all up with a recurring seasonal routine.
So, Section 1, the spring melt threat and setting the stakes. I really want to emphasize this right up front. A small, seemingly totally insignificant blockage right now, like a handful of leaves or a tiny little crack, can turn into a massive, structurally devastating, and incredibly expensive repair if you just ignore it until the melt begins. If you ignore the thaw, you're basically buying into 4 catastrophic outcomes. First, overflowing gutters, where water just cascades down your walls like a waterfall. Second, basement seepage. Imagine walking downstairs and just getting hit by that pungent, musty odor of damp concrete and ruined drywall. Third, soggy lawns that turn your beautiful backyard into a completely unusable swamp. And finally, the absolute worst one, foundation erosion. When water pools and washes away the very earth holding your house up, the damage can be staggering. We definitely want to avoid every single one of these.
Moving on to Section 2, defending the roofline, which is our first line of defense.
Since water moved with gravity, it makes total logical sense that our home defense has to begin at the absolute highest point. You really can't fix a puddle on the ground if the water is overflowing from 2 stories up, right? So here are your 3 actionable steps for gutter inspection. First, check for winter debris. And we're not just talking about your standard leaves and twigs here. You need to look for roofing grit and that heavy, sludgy ice dam residue that winter leaves behind. Second, scan the whole perimeter for sagging sections or separated joints where the sheer weight of the ice might have actually ripped the metal apart. And step 3, and please, this is crucial, after you clear out the visible clogs, you have to physically get a hose and flush water down the downspouts. Don't just assume a downspout is clear because it looks empty from the top. You absolutely must confirm that water is flowing freely out the bottom.
Which leads us perfectly into how that water actually exits. Good drainage means the downspout extends several feet away from the house. It's actively preventing runoff from pooling at the base of your foundation. Bad drainage, on the other hand, is when water just wets the exterior walls, collects in these massive puddles right by your doors, or maybe the splash blocks shifted entirely away during the winter freeze-thaw cycles. If your setup looks like the bad example, you've got to adjust that discharge immediately. Clear out any buried underground extensions and get that water flowing far, far away from your brick and mortar.
All right, Section 3, ground and yard drainage, where we manage the surface flow.
Now that the water has successfully made it off the roof, our job isn't quite done. We have to manage it once it hits the earth. Managing groundwater is all about grading, which is really just a fancy way of saying the angle of the dirt. First, you have to ensure the surface always slopes away from the foundation. Gravity should make the water want to run away from your house, never back towards it. Second, hunt around for depressions where meltwater collects, especially around solid surfaces like walkways, patios, and driveways. And third, listen to this one carefully. Refill those low spots with the appropriate material. And by appropriate, I mean do not use topsoil. Topsoil is incredibly light. It's going to wash away the second a heavy spring rain hits it. You need dense, compacted material to actually change the slope of your yard.
Now, you might also have some specific drainage features on your property, like a swale or a catch basin. Basically, this is a shallow yard channel or a neighborhood drainage inlet that's specifically designed to aggressively manage water runoff. If your property has one of these, you have to maintain it. Clear the dead leaves off the grates. Ensure it isn't surrounded by junk that ends up funneling water right back toward your foundation. A really good rule of thumb here: there should never be standing water left over in these areas after a normal rainfall. If there is, it means it's blocked.
So, we've checked the roof, we've checked the yard, everything seems fine, but what happens when your exterior defenses fail? What happens when a storm is just way too heavy or a sudden freeze cracks a pipe underground? That brings us to Section 4, protecting your foundation, the last stand against seepage.
Your foundation is the absolute final line of defense, and let me tell you, any drainage failures we might have missed outside, they will stubbornly, inevitably show up right here first. Here are the steps to seal up that perimeter. First, inspect your window wells, basement bulkheads, and any place where a pipe or wire penetrates the exterior wall. Second, check that your exterior caulking and seals are entirely intact and that your window well covers fit tightly without any weird gaps. And third, test the sump pump. Now, what's really interesting about this step is that people very often test to see if the sump pump turns on, but they completely forget to verify that the discharge line outside is actually clear. A working pump that's just pushing water into a frozen or clogged pipe is going to burn out the motor and flood your basement anyway. You have to ensure it's actively directing water away from the home.
And as a homeowner, you kind of have to play detective here. You want to monitor for 3 specific interior warning signs after any heavy melt. Are there damp spots showing up on the walls or the concrete floors? Are you catching musty odors in the basement? Do you see actual water pooling along the interior perimeter? If these persistent issues start appearing, it's highly recommended to get a professional assessment. Seriously, do not wait for repeated freeze-thaw damage to literally crack your home in half.
Finally, Section 5, a recurring seasonal routine to future-proof your home. We don't just want to survive one single spring thaw, we want to future-proof your home for good. Setting up a routine right now is the absolute fastest and most reliable path to long-term protection. So here is your ultimate recurring seasonal checklist. You want to do gutter inspections in both early spring and the fall. You need to do a downspout flush with a hose after any major storm that knocks debris out of the trees. Do a really quick yard check after a heavy rain just to make sure water is flowing exactly where it's supposed to. And lastly, revisit any temporary fixes you made to ensure they haven't just washed out. Committing just a few hours to this routine now significantly reduces your risk of recurring clogs and ultimately saves you from massive, costly damage later in the year. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. Your drainage system survived this freeze-thaw cycle, but is it ready for the next one? The weather is always changing, and gravity literally never takes a day off. Take this Dr. Drain checklist, get outside, and make sure your home is fully prepared before the next temperature swing catches you off guard. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope you found this helpful. Until next time, stay dry and stay curious.